All right, everybody, welcome back. We are going to start this episode as an introduction to the schematic. We've spent some time looking at how parts are created, but why bother making parts if you're not going to make a circuit? So this is really where it starts. What you see on the screen here is the leftovers from a previous episode where we're just kind of throwing some stuff around and looking at how the attributes and the values are displayed. But we're going to start by getting rid of this. Well, lasso all of that stuff and go to the delete. There we go. So just hit the delete key, got rid of that. So this is what'll happen when you first open up a schematic. And just to review, we started at the control panel. When you first open up Eagle, this is all that comes up. And all we did was go to File, New, and Schematic. And this is effectively what you get. From the very beginning, save it. In this case, I've labeled this one, or saved it as a test.a-v1, and we'd already created a board, and this is what happens. It's actually two separate files. So SCH is the schematic, .brd is the board, and the Eagle software maintains a correlation between these two files. And these other ones where it says B hashtag or #1, all that kind of stuff, those are automatic backup files. As I save this thing and kind of move along, it drops these additional ones in there. So over time, this folder will be filled up with all of these little backup files, which is kind of nice to have those kind of breadcrumbs. I also increase the revision on my files, but we can talk about that on a different day. But that's what you should expect. That's what those weird file names are. So the first thing in schematic is that we work on a fixed grid in Eagle. Now you can kind of sort of fudge this if you really wanted to, but it's simply not worth it. For the most part, I'm going to want to turn on the grid, which you can click this and it pulls up the grid. This little section right here is the command line, which you can type in commands, and it's actually really pretty handy. I don't use it too much, but when I need it, I need it. You know, it's probably worth 3 or 4 videos on the use of command line and all that kind of stuff to give you a sense of how powerful that can be. So the default is that the displayed grid is off, but it's at 100,000ths of an inch. So even you metric folks out there, inch is the game in Eagle. So just kind of stick with this. And the alternate grid, I'm not too terribly worried about, but the biggest reason to have the alternate grid set at about 10% of the main grid is because there's some elements that don't need to be on the grid, like names, values, various text labels, notes, and all that kind of stuff that aren't electrically significant. They're just for notes. So anyway, I wanted to turn the display on, and I'll hit OK. Now we can see the display. I've also got this mapped to a hotkey, so I can turn the grid on and off quickly using F6 in my case. So the next thing is we just have this big giant black area, and for a schematic, that's not a great place to start. I pretty much always start with what's called a frame. So this is something that comes with Eagle. You can make up your own. You can modify these till your heart's content. This is not a bad one to start with for the basic stuff, the 8.5 by 11. So I will go here. Alrighty, so I placed the bottom left corner of the frame right at the origin at 0, 0. And as usual, Eagle is always letting me place as many of these things as I want, but I just want one. So escape gets me back to there, another escape gets me out. So now we have a drawing space. And we have a couple of little metadata things. This tells me the file name that I've already saved and the date. And it says not saved. Okay, so even when I save it, it still says not saved. So this is something that it only updates when you open up the file. So if I close this thing and I go back over here to my projects and I open up... Uh-oh, I pushed the wrong button. I apologize. I opened up another instance of Eagle, which isn't really a problem. So now we have the date and the time that we opened it. And this is kind of handy as we drop breadcrumbs. So now we've got a frame to work with. This is great. Over here on the left, this space over here is for additional sheets. If I just right-click on this thing and say New, it creates an additional sheet. it doesn't copy the other one because you see we don't have a frame here. So we would have to add another frame to this one if we wanted a second sheet. And this is something like my previous design, I think, had 13 or 14 sheets. You know, if you're making something extremely simple, you won't really care or notice. Frames. I'm not sure why it's taking so long. Tell you what, let me close that one. No, don't close it. I'm going to open up the original one that I had. Factory 400 test. All right, sorry. So what I did there is I accidentally opened up 2 instances of Eagle. I'm just going to go back to the other one so that nothing goes completely crazy. All right, so now we can just start adding components. Well, you know what? Tell you what. Let me explain a little bit here. So we have all the normal menu stuff here. We have a fixed menu bar up here that has a bunch of features that you might, may or may not use. These are all of the tools that are used to make and edit your schematic, and it pulls up a menu bar at the top as you pick these things. You can see now you have a menu that's related to the net command and the mirror command and the text command, all of those kinds of things. So keep an eye on the top for the context-sensitive components. So let's see. We're going to pick Add Part, and I think all I'm going to do is just make an LED on a switch. So if that's our goal, I'm going to look for a switch first. And let's see, TL330. Yeah, you know what? I've used this one before. So there's our switch. We can place as many as we want, like this. And Control Z gets rid of the ones that I don't want. And if I want to move this thing around, we simply hit Move. We can pick it up by one single click, rotate it just like anything else, and another click puts it down. And a quick confirmation is that the electrical connections are indeed on the grid. This little section right here that looks like it's off grid, that is merely a kind of graphical representation. These are the actual electrical connections on that particular switch. So the next thing we need will be, let's see, an LED. We'll pick some random LED. At this point, since this is not a real circuit, I don't really care. So here's an LED. Excellent. We can kind of put that wherever we want. And escape. The next thing we'll want, I think, is a resistor. So down the road, we can kind of go through how I'm picking some of these things. For now, I'm picking really pretty random components just to show you how the whole thing works. Alright, so these are kind of the most important pieces of our circuit, but what else do we need to make an LED light up? We need power. So let's go back to here and search for supply. And supply, these are, this library comes with Eagle. And you can pick all these different supplies. And honestly, it doesn't really matter, the +5, -12, all that stuff. That's just kind of a name that they gave it. Of course, this -12 can be whatever you want it to be. You can tell it to be whatever. I'll use a little plus with the circle around it for our positive voltage. And we need some kind of return or ground. And we'll use this one. This is fine. Everybody's going to have their own preferences, and this is not a lesson in how to design the most amazing schematic. This is really just kind of how to use the tools. Maybe we'll get into that later, but for now, I just want to make a functional circuit. So let's see. Let's move some of these things around. Generally, you want the supply at the top and ground at bottom, so that's pretty good. So we'll move our switch here. And we will move our resistor to, here is fine. There's that, and here is our ground. Alright, so now we need to connect all these things, and this is relatively straightforward. We'll use the net command. In my case, I have it, again, attached to a hotkey. And when you hover over a possible electrical connection, you get that little circle, and just a real quick note, if you look on layer, We're on layer 91, which is nets. This is how you actually connect stuff. And a net is essentially a any connection, any group of connections that have the same name, that are on the same node of the circuit. So I will just simply click here, and if you notice, this thing is automatically making right angles, and it's trying to kind of support me as I go to these different possible places that terminate the wire. And as I right click, I can change the shape of that wire based on this little menu here. But this one just goes straight down to the switch, and we like that. This one, we want to come out of the switch, up and over to our resistor, and this one we want to come out of the resistor into our LED, and this one we want to come over here to ground. And so this is a very simple, actually functional circuit. Every time we push this little switch, it's going to connect the power supply to ground through the diode and the resistor, and the diode would light up. That's great. So the thing is that this is laid out a little bit crazy. I mean, it's probably not an obvious thing, but just say we want to clean this thing up. We'll select move. Come on now. Let's move this over here. That's where, say we want our power supply to be there. But now we have this like kind of strange angled thing here on a single line. And if we try to move that one, it doesn't move, because it's what it's looking for right now is the shortest path between those. So we need this one line to become two. So let's right click that and say split. And oh, look at that. Now we can make two segments out of it and kind of get it all straightened out. And generally, I don't like having stuff come out at a right angle. So I'm going to split this one more time. Whoops. Split. There we go. Now we get one little segment, one little jog this way, one little jog that way. Cool. So I want this line to be kind of parallel, so I'll move my resistor up. And now we have that same kind of bent line problem, but we already have two segments, so we don't have to split it. I can just come over here, select the move tool, and move that up. Same thing with this one. I want this to not be this kind of weird thing. I want to have all right angles in my schematic layout, and there we have it. So again, with the move tool activated, I can move the ground up and down. But let's move the actual ground symbol over here. So now we have 1, 2, 3 segments. If I grab this corner and I move this one over here, now we have one segment. So what happened is Eagle saw that there's just a straight line there now, and it healed all 3 segments into one. So now at this point, if I wanted to move the ground over here for whatever reason, I would have to go and split it back up into 2. Or I can split it into 3, or you know, whatever I want to do. So I'm going to Control Z, and that gets me out of that. So let's say that that's kind of what we want, and that gives you an introduction to how to establish the nets and how to edit them and kind of manipulate them, move them around. So the next thing I would want to do is label these nets. When they're put down on the schematic, they get some kind of, oh, you know what? Because this one is connected to a supply, it automatically gets this one of +5. That's great. +5V. We can change that anytime we want, but that is the default because we picked a supply thing there. So let's look at this one, out of the switch into this resistor. This one is going to be a little bit more cryptic, in $1. You know, let's come up with a better name for that. We'll call it SW out. And even if you're in lowercase, Eagle forces this to be uppercase. And it says the checkbox place label. So now it's trying to put a label on there, and labels can have all kinds of different types. We can do this one. We'll make it a little bit smaller. Probably wouldn't label this in real life, but you know, I'm right-clicking to rotate it as usual. So that's going to go there. And tell you what, this one needs to be broken up. I can only do 15 minutes at a time on this one, so let's pick it up on part 2.